Good evening, everyone. We're so excited that you all took the time out of your busy schedule to meet with us this evening to talk about financial aid. What an exciting subject to be talking about. But I'm excited to get started with you all this evening. A little bit about myself. My name is David Burney. I am the Director of Financial Aid for John Brown University. And, oh dear. Okay, sorry about that. Little technical difficulty. So where was I? My name is David Burney. I'm the Director of Financial Aid at John Brown University in Siloam Springs, Arkansas. I have a little over 14 years of financial aid experience. I'm currently serving as the chair of the CCCU Financial Aid Administrators Commission, which just gives me an opportunity to connect with a lot of other Christian schools to hopefully help and serve our students well with financial aid. So the goal of this evening is to provide some information about the financial aid process, but hopefully to answer some of the most, so sorry that my slides keep moving. So the goal of this evening is to answer some questions about the financial aid process and hopefully some tips and some tricks along the way to provide some information as you all are going about the college search process. So I first want to talk about where the money comes from at schools. So it's really this principle called the discount rate. This is what schools use in order to provide scholarships for students. So they take a portion of tuition and fee revenue and they generate that back into student scholarships in order to give your students a variety of different options to go to school. So you might commonly hear in the news and in the media what the school's discount rate is. That's simply the portion of their tuition and fee revenue that they have channeled back into scholarships. Now, what type of scholarships? So the biggest types would be merit-based scholarships. Those are academic scholarships, they are athletic scholarships, art scholarships, music scholarships, but they're based off of performance. So they are going to be, the student is going to qualify for those based off of something. In the academic scholarship world, there's a lot of changes going on right now due to the pandemic. A lot of schools you might see are going to test optional programs. That's become very popular over the past 4 months due to the lack of the availability of standardized testing at the moment. My recommendation would be to contact the schools that you're interested in directly and to ask what types of academic scholarships do they have? Do they have options that are test optional? Do they have requirements or deadlines that you have to meet in order to qualify for these academic scholarships? With the academic scholarships, a good thing to keep in mind is that most of them are renewable for the entirety of your college career. So 4 years while you're in school, they typically have requirements to keep those GPA requirements. So keep up to date with the school on what their requirements are to keep those. The other types of merit-based or performance scholarships require some type of audition or a tryout or maybe a portfolio. But the key thing with the merit-based scholarships is that the FAFSA is not required. So that's really the difference between merit-based aid and need-based aid. So need-based aid, the other category of institutional aid, you see that more in institutional scholarships, a pretty common one if a school has a founders award or a scholarship that has the title of their school in it or grant. Those are typically need-based funds that the school can use to stack actually on top of merit-based aid in order to help your student fill the gap. Other types of need-based aid would be endowed scholarships or even work-study programs. There's a couple types of work-study programs, institutional and federal. So why should you apply early? This is a question that we receive a lot in the financial aid world of why do we hear, okay, get your FAFSA in as soon as possible? Well, there are funds that do run out. One of the most common funds that run out are known as campus allocated funds. Those are funds that come from the federal government given to schools, and they're distributed typically on a first come first serve basis. So the 2021 2022 FAFSA, or free application for federal student aid, becomes available on October 1st of this year, and I would recommend to apply as soon as possible. The FAFSA has actually simplified the process, and so you no longer need the current year's taxes in order to complete the FAFSA, and you can use prior year's taxes. So it's really simplified the process, making it pretty easy to apply early in order to get that application to the school as soon as possible, which increases the students' chances of possibly receiving all of the scholarships that are available, right? So sometimes when funds run out, such as work study or the federal supplemental educational opportunity grant, which is based off of the Pell Grant, those are smaller funds. And so by sending in that FAFSA early and on time, gets you in line for some of those funds. So the 2021-2022 FAFSA relies on the 2019 tax return. And on the FAFSA, you can select an option called the IRS data retrieval tool, which will actually pull in all of your tax information on the FAFSA and make it such a simpler process. So file that FAFSA here coming up really in a couple of weeks, and then you'll be ready to go. So another common question that I get a lot is we won't qualify for any financial aid. So why should we even file the FAFSA? Well, I have got a little secret that I don't want to just let out of the bag, but here it goes. So most institutions use a methodology called federal methodology, meaning that we base our scholarships off of the result of the FAFSA. We base scholarships off of a need calculation. I have listed this calculation here for you on the screen. It is not a secret. It is cost of attendance, so tuition, fees, room and board, books, estimated travel expenses, everything that would build a budget basically in order to go to school. We take our cost of attendance and we subtract out your expected family contribution. That is the number that comes from the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. So the FAFSA, while it does qualify you for need-based grants federally, such as the Pell Grant or the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant or work study, schools use the FAFSA for a variety of other things, such as the distribution of their own need-based grants. So submitting the FAFSA gives the school all of the information that we need in order to make the best determination for the student. So my recommendation would be to file the FAFSA the first year, and then if it did not prove to be useful at all, never file it again. I encourage all of my families here at JBU, file that FAFSA the first year. Let's work on your financial aid and see what options might be available. And once again, a quick apology about my slideshow. It is definitely frustrating me because it keeps popping back and forth, but we're going to keep on going. So what if the results of the FAFSA do not describe your financial situation? The government has given schools a variety of provisions that we are able to offer in order to adjust the results of the FAFSA, since there's a 2-year difference in your tax information. Recently, the government has given us provisions for additional adjustments that can be made based off of job loss due to COVID. So we are able, based off of your financial circumstances, to go in and adjust your FAFSA information. Now, before we talk in depth about some of these situations, my recommendation would be to first file the FAFSA using your 2019 tax information. So on October 1st, file the FAFSA using your 2019 tax information, use the IRS data retrieval tool, and then contact your school that you're interested in and say, I have heard of this process from this crazy guy who had a terrible PowerPoint about a professional judgment. So a professional judgment could be for anything such as job loss, a loss of income, a one-time income reduction. So if you had a dip that you were not expecting, that could be taken into account. Extreme medical expenses, private tuition expenses. So if you're still paying private tuition for other children in your household, we can take that into account on the FAFSA. And then also we have the ability to do what's called a dependency override for students that are in extreme situations. We can work with them in order to change their dependency status. So with these, there is a process that has to be completed called verification. This is typically this one of the scariest words in financial aid. So verification is simply a checks and balances process. So it's nothing to be afraid of. But when you file the FAFSA, just a heads up that 1/3 of all FAFSAs are selected for this process called verification. It doesn't mean that you did anything wrong, and it is definitely not the government coming for you. I have heard that from a family. It is simply the school's responsibility to contact you and to ask some clarifying and verifying questions about the information that you put on the FAFSA. My recommendation would be to follow up with your school if you're selected for verification and to go through that process as quickly as possible. Now, I do understand it might be difficult to find some of the documentation if you don't know where your tax return is, or if you don't know where some of the information is. It might be a little difficult to locate it, but I would recommend to do that process sooner than later. What often happens is that families will wait to finish the verification process because they are choosing schools or waiting to solidify the financial aid process. The next thing you know, school's starting and we still have this outstanding process that we have to verify before your student can receive financial aid. Same case of in a professional judgment situation, a school will select you for verification first in order to verify that everything on your FAFSA was correct. And then they will follow up with you on the documentation required to do a professional judgment. Which kind of brings me to my next point. So the financial aid offer is really a conversation. And I think that it would be very easy to see it as something else. So the process is simple. Your student applies for admissions at the school of their choice. Great. Work to get in those test scores or transcripts or whatever you need in order to satisfy the application process at your school. October 1st, file the FAFSA. Once those two things are connected, once you have received acceptance at the school of your choice and you have filed the FAFSA, the financial aid office, they're going to be working as quickly as possible to get you a financial aid offer letter. This is a fancy way to describe a list of everything that you will qualify for. Now, here's some things that I want to kind of give you a heads up about the financial aid offer letter. It's going to really include the school's best, not option, but it's going to include the school's best that they can do based off of the information that they have. One of the questions that we get is, well, do you have just extra money lying around? I do, but it's not designated for that purpose. No, I'm just kidding. I don't have bags of money underneath my desk. But the point is that schools really work to put their best foot forward, because oftentimes the financial aid process can be really overwhelming. So most schools see the financial aid offer as being a conversation piece. Someone from the school, either the admissions recruiter, which is pretty common in some cases, or someone from the financial aid office will be wanting to talk to your family about everything that's listed on the financial aid offer. If your student is Pell Grant eligible, or if they're receiving academic scholarships, what's involved there, or work study or need-based grants, even student loans will be listed on the financial aid offer if you file the FAFSA. I would go through that process and I would ask really great questions with your recruiter or with a financial aid representative about what your balance due is, what the payment plan or payment options look like at your chosen institution. I would also ask really good questions about will I lose my scholarships if I don't get this GPA or if I don't take a certain number of credit hours? Also ask for, could this change based off of the result of my FAFSA, or how long am I guaranteed this scholarship? All of those are really great questions to start engaging in the financial aid process, which kind of brings me to one of my last points that I'd like to talk to you all about tonight. So what happens if you receive this awesome financial aid offer from your school, but then you're crunching the numbers with your family and you realize that it just doesn't work financially for you? I think there's a little bit of a misnomer in the financial aid world about the ability to appeal for additional financial aid funds. Well, that's definitely possible and definitely a conversation that you can engage in. But let me assist with a few things that might be helpful when you are talking to a school about appealing for additional financial aid. My first recommendation, from a person who has done this process a couple of times, would be to not compare financial aid offers between schools. Here is what we commonly get sometimes, and I'll tell you why it doesn't work. So, Dave, we're super excited about this financial aid offer from JBU, but you know what? We were just really surprised that this school over here, that shall not be named, that they're actually offering us $10,000 more to go to their school. Now we think that JBU is great, but like this other school is offering us $10,000 more to go to school there. Like, can JBU like kind of fill that gap with another $10,000? Here's my first response to that, which I don't often say, is sometimes I say, well, maybe you should go to that other school because that's a lot of money. You should do that. But here's a different way to go about this process. I'm not able to see the offer letter from another school. I don't know the type of school, the caliber of school, their discount rate, if they're in a good financial standing as a university. I'm not able to see a lot of things that create this financial aid offer. What I want to know about as a director of financial aid, in having a conversation with you and your family, I want to know what works for you at my school. So I'm going to ask you really specific questions about a budget, about how much you're able to pay, about what the gap is, so the amount of money that it would take for you to come to my school. And we're going to have sometimes an intense, but a really great conversation about what it would look like to make it work financially at my school. Oftentimes I have resources available from a variety of different options that I'm able to fill in order to help make it affordable. So my recommendation when appealing for financial aid is to not compare to other schools, but to focus on the school that God is leading you to and that you really see yourself at, because that school will work. I tell families, I say, if you really want to be here, I'll do everything I can to make sure that you're at my school. So that was a lot in 18 minutes, my goodness. But I really want to open it up for questions. I know that we're monitoring the questions here in the chat. So please feel free. Here's my contact information. I would love if you shoot me an email or give me a call. My response time might be a little slow because we're about to open up the FAFSA here in just a second on October 1st, and so things could get busy, but I would love to answer your questions. So a great question is about, what about financial aid for international students? It's correct. International students, unfortunately, cannot file the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, but you can contact your school, and many schools like JBU offer international grants specifically for international students. We'll offer international students academic scholarships based off of your test scores or your GPAs. We also offer need-based grants. We have an institutional application for need-based aid. Many schools have that as well. Many schools will also offer work study to international students. So as an international student, I would apply for admissions. I would contact your admissions recruiter and I would ask about next steps for the financial aid process. It does look a little different, but there's lots of resources that can be used. So in regards to holding financial aid for years after you graduate from high school, many schools will actually defer your financial aid until you're ready to come to your school, to that school. Sometimes they will not hold certain scholarships depending on the criteria of the scholarship. But I would definitely contact your school and I would say, hey, I'm really interested in going to your school. What are the possibilities of me doing a missions trip or a gap year or a link year program and still have financial aid once I get to your school? Yes, I would really recommend everybody to file the FAFSA, even those with high income. So, you know, it's one of those things that my financial aid is based off of somewhat of a high cost of attendance because of what it takes to attend JBU. And so even those with high income often qualify for institutional aid. They might not qualify for federal aid, but you might receive institutional aid, maybe even work study, which kind of bridges into the next question. So what is work study? I mentioned it a couple of times. I didn't describe it for you. My apologies on that. But work study is an opportunity for your student to work so many hours a week at the institution. Most institutions pay minimum wage of the state, and you can work. Well, at JBU, our students can work 7.5 hours a week, but that amount that you work per week is based off of the school's work study budget. Here at JBU, we have almost 800 students that are on the work study program, and it is a huge part of our institution. So I would definitely check out work study if you're interested. Well, the next question is a little tricky. The question is in regards to, can financial aid vary in state versus out of state? Now, typically, not to answer for all private liberal arts schools, but most Christian colleges do not differentiate because they're private schools between in-state and out-of-state tuition. And most financial aid does not vary based off of that as well. So here at JBU, if you are coming from across state lines, you would receive the similar aid package to a student who is from the state of Arkansas. The only difference really here in the state of Arkansas is we do have a state grant program. So some schools will have state grants that residents of that state would qualify for, and that's the same here in Arkansas. And so I would just check with your school, but for the most part, your financial aid should not vary based off of your residency status. That's a great question. So another question is about priority deadlines for financial aid. So what does that mean and how can we be prepared for that? So a priority deadline is simply giving you a date in order to put on your calendar to help facilitate the financial aid process. Oftentimes it is because there's a limited funding available. So priority deadlines, we offer a priority deadline. We encourage students to file the FAFSA in the fall semester so that we can send them an offer letter in December so that we can begin the financial aid conversation as soon as possible. Our goal is to finish the financial aid process before you graduate high school. So we would love if you graduate high school, have the summer, and then you're headed off to college and you don't have to worry about a lot of the details. So sometimes priority deadlines are set up to help move you through that process or to help safeguard scholarships that might not be available, if that makes sense. Yes, I do have some experience with post 9/11 VA benefits. That's definitely a question that I would recommend that you email me, because it is dependent so much on the student and the VA benefits that you would qualify for. A school is going to ask for your 1699, which is your certificate of eligibility. You can request your certificate of eligibility through your VA officer, your VA education officer. They'll send your eligibility to the school, and your school will certify your post 9/11 Chapter 33 benefits. But if you have more questions on that, please feel free to shoot me an email. So when should I file the FAFSA if I'm a junior in high school? So super great question. I would recommend that while you can file the FAFSA now, the FAFSA is something that you do every year. And so you would want to refile the FAFSA October 1st of 2021 for the 2022-2023 school year, my word. So the FAFSA is every year. And kind of the last question that I will just wrap up is a question about, does the FAFSA take into account retirement accounts, investment accounts? And basically the question is money that is not really usable. They do not take into account retirement accounts. They will take into account anything that you have that is not specifically designated, such as an investment account that's not specifically designated for retirement. My suggestion is there is a question mark box on the FAFSA on the upper right-hand portion of the screen. On each question, you can select that option and it will tell you exactly what the question means and what you should include in your answer. So that is all for now. Please, I would love to hear from you either through phone or through email. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know that this has been a really great experience. Thank you for your patience tonight. Have a great night.